Hi, everyone. I'm Rick Seltzer, Projects Editor at Inside Higher Ed. And this panel is Maximizing In-House Talent, Upskilling That Works. There's a wonderful set of panelists today. From immediately to my left down, we have Plinio Ayala, President and CEO of Scholas, which designs courses in response to employer needs to provide tuition-free training to workers for key technical roles. Andrew Dunckelman is Head of Education and Economic Opportunity at Google.org, which is Google's philanthropic organization. There he leads investments in computer science education, digital skills, and the future of work. Then finally is Tracy Tapani, co-president of Wyoming Machine Inc., a 55-employee sheet metal fabricator in Minnesota. She's involved in volunteer activities promoting math and science education, technical training, and manufacturing careers, and her company has an interesting partnership with the local community and technical college that I think we'll be hearing a little more about. So to start, I'd like to hear a little bit from each of you and make sure that everyone in the room understands the perspective you bring to this panel. Would you each mind telling us a little bit about how your enterprises are involved in upskilling?
Sure. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me, and certainly thank you to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation for organizing this event. So I am in the talent development business, right? I run a not-for-profit that really believes that effective workforce development has to be done through the lens of the corporate sector. So everything that we do, the creation of curriculum, the design of program, is done in partnership with employers as they inform exactly what are the skill sets that we need to teach people in order for them to get jobs in the IT sector. And so that approach for us has allowed us to expand our model. We now train about 2,200 people a year in 11 cities across the country, with graduation rates upwards of 85, 88%, somewhere in that area, and we're placing folks at a similar wage, at a similar rate, I should say. But we're working with individuals from overlooked communities, individuals who are incredibly talented, super gritty. All they need is an opportunity, and we can, in a very short period of time, get them trained and into these middle-skilled positions earning good wages.
So I think the core insight for us that really motivates our work in upskilling has been this profound increase in digital skills that are required on the job. And you've heard that from other speakers this morning. I don't think anyone needs to be told it, but Brookings says that there's been about a 50% decline in the number of jobs that don't require many digital skills over the last 15 years. So for us, that has profound implications on not only our employees, but also our clients and those people who use Google all the time. And so what we've done is we've invested through a program called Grow with Google in equipping Americans with the needed digital skills to be successful in life and in their jobs. I think one interesting sort of trend that I've observed in this sector, just being involved for a few years now, is this move from companies not just focusing on their own workforce, although that's critical, and I do think there's been a huge increase in the number of dollars and hours that companies are spending in upskilling their workforces, but also looking beyond their walls to invest in the society as a whole. I think they see a market imperative in that. I think they see a marketing advantage. And so you see companies like ours making programs available like our IT support certificate, which is on Coursera, helping people to get into critical jobs in IT support. We've actually partnered with Scholas on this effort. We have our machine learning crash course developed for Google engineers to get them ready in the fundamentals of machine learning, now available for free to anyone in the world who wants to use it. So I think among the many trends we can probably get into, that has been really interesting for me to observe, and certainly has been really critical to the efforts that we've done through Grow with Google and Google.org.
Tracy?
So from my perspective, as you already heard, we're a small sheet metal fabrication company, and I would consider many of the skills that are necessary in the type of business I own to be kind of traditional. But like Google, we also have new skills that people need to acquire because of changes in technology in our industry. So we've seen a lack of workers available doing traditional things like welding, running machining centers, and that's really how our interest in this thing that we now call upskilling developed. And so here we are in our small organization trying to run a small family-owned business, not being able to find the workers we need. I started to realize that there was sort of a trend going on in this when a few years ago I was invited to attend President Obama's Upskill America Summit, which kind of gave me a language and a way to think about what we were dealing with. But it really is, for us, a lot about taking our incumbent workforce, people that have been working for a long time, some that are new to the workforce, who really don't have an adequate set of skills, and trying to figure out how are we going to continue to advance them so that our business can grow and we can support the economy in our community, as well as provide good paying jobs for the people that live in the area.
And that last point that you made about who exactly you're training, I wonder, Plinio, I know that this is something you wanted to discuss, is which employees or prospective employees upskilling can affect.
Yeah, I think when you look at the definition of upskilling, it almost always includes just incumbent workers. And I would dare say that we probably need to broaden the population a bit. So I'm going to be a little bit provocative this afternoon. And so here's my thought, right? Right after the Great Recession hit, we started seeing a larger percentage of folks coming to us with some college, either a 2-year degree or in some cases a 4-year degree. And as we did the analysis, we saw that they were actually getting degrees in skill sets that just weren't relevant in the space, right? And so they were having difficulty attaching themselves to the labor market. Over the last several years, we have seen a large percentage of those degrees being in the computer science area. And so what we've concluded is that the technology is changing so fast that it's not allowing colleges to be nimble enough to adapt to the requirements of the labor force. And so organizations like ours have identified these individuals that have skills already. They've got a tremendous a set of soft skills, right? They're highly motivated, they're tremendously gritty, perseverance is through the roof. They need to be upskilled to be able to get the right level of skills to become employed. And so in 16 weeks, we can get someone from point A to point B and get them right into a job relatively quickly. And so the reason I mention that is because if we talk about policy, it's incredibly important that that population is not excluded. Just because they've got a degree doesn't mean that they are ready to enter the workforce. And so we need to be mindful of that, and there needs to be an intentionality around creating last mile training to get these individuals into good paying jobs.
Should we view that as a failure of the college sector or something else?
Well, I think yes and no. I think it's good intentioned people are running these amazing institutions. I think the bureaucracy that we've created has inhibited them from being able to move fast enough, right? And so, you know, one of the policy recommendations that I keep trying to make is, look, Department of Education, alleviate some of these restrictions. When a college wants to get a curriculum approved, it shouldn't take them a year to get them approved, because once it's done and it's approved, it's probably antiquated. And so I think it's a combination of things that have kept colleges from being able to move fast enough. But I think if that policy recommendation was adopted, I would see a lot more ability from colleges to be able to move fast enough to meet the demands of employers.
Tracy, you've done a lot of work with colleges. Can you talk about your experiences there a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to do that, and I'll do that quickly. But I want to add to what was just said, too. I think that part of the problem that we experience is that we are kind of in a society where skills are for some people and education is for other people. I do not believe that is true, and I think that we would all benefit from not talking about that or not thinking about that. Every human being needs to have skills in order to get a job, in order to get paid. I think a few years ago I saw that LinkedIn did a study of all the people that are on LinkedIn, and what they showed by that is the people that have the most skills, that list the most skills that they possess, are the people that make the most money. Every human being needs skills. So it's not educated people and skilled people. They need to come together. Even skilled people are educated. In terms of the partnership that we have with our local community and technical college, through a federal grant kind of started this process. But our technical college had access to some technology, which is commonly referred to as interactive television. They were able to build a consortium with a number of schools throughout Minnesota and offer college credit courses remotely. So I have employees that work at Wyoming Machine who need some additional skills training. can benefit from getting a certificate of some sort, and they get to, while they're at work, go into a room with a large screen television that's interactive. It's a live course where they see an instructor. The instructor can see the employees that are participating in it. My employees can see other people that are participating remotely, but we're hosting live classes like that because oftentimes for incumbent workers, if you've worked a 10-hour day in manufacturing or a 9-hour day in manufacturing, and you have a family to go home to and you want to participate in the life of your children and your family members or do whatever activities you do outside of work, I think it's a little bit hard to expect that people are going to drive 40 miles if they live in a rural area to go into a classroom in a community and technical college and spend a whole night in class, and sometimes multiple nights a week in class. So this technology has really made it possible for people to access classes a lot easier in a less intimidating environment where here they are at their work site that they go to every day. They feel comfortable. They have the support of their coworkers if they're not used to taking those kind of classes to help get them through what sometimes can be a really scary experience for people. So we have been able to get people college certificates based on taking those courses in a very cost-effective way.
Can I just maybe illustrate one point that I think both Plinio and Tracy's stories show me is I get frustrated a lot of times in these future of work conversations about the way we brand reskilling. And there's sort of this paradigm that reskilling means your skills deplete until, hey, it's time for a new career and I've got to go and take a new college course or Coursera certificate or whatever. It is certainly true for some people that it will be drastic. But I think by and large, most of us reskill every day, all the time. And so we need to match the kinds of credentials that are available with the nature of reskilling that happens, whether that's, there's been a conversation for years about badging, micro-credentials or whatever. But do you think we need to rethink how reskilling happens and recognize that all of us are going through this process every working day? There are 1 billion views of YouTube learning videos in every single day alone. And so I think reskilling is a really broad term, and sometimes it can be unhelpful because it suggests a certain thing that I think it not always is.
There's a certain level of destruction or negativity there, whereas I think it sounds like maybe you're emphasizing the upside to both the employer and the corporation.
Well, I think that's true. There's value to all of us kind of building our skills regularly, and it's a lot less scary, isn't it, if we're not saying, hey, it's time for you to reskill, but instead we're sort of continuously learning and growing and developing. To me, that's a heck of a lot more exciting than I got to look down the tunnel at a new college degree in a few years.
Is there a difficulty in any of your experiences in getting employees or prospective employees to look at it in that way that was just described?
I'm in the IT sector, and so part of what we teach our students is how to learn, right? And so once they adopt that sort of philosophy or way of doing, it's easy for them to understand what that means, right? In many cases in the IT sector, the more you learn, the more you're going to make, right? But I think to what Andrew's point, you're spot on. I think if we can get people into IT now, they're likely to figure out how to maneuver their way through all of the changes that will transpire over the next several years. And so my chances, or their chances, are really good because they're constantly learning and they've accepted that as part of the way of doing business.
And you're also equipping them with an important level of baseline professional skills that they need in order to even be in those environments to then pursue that kind of ongoing reskill.
Exactly.
Now, one thing that's always very interesting to me is the idea of who foots the bill for this kind of a thing. Whose responsibility is it to pay for employee upskilling? Is there a model that should be applied across different sectors, across different geographies, or is it a little more variable?
I think that an employer plays a big role in helping to pay for that. But I also think that it has to be a partnership among government agencies as well and some support systems. In the particular area of Minnesota that I live or where my company is located, we have a high percentage of the population in some of the surrounding counties that is very poor. I think for Pine Technical and Community College, which is the college closest to us, like 85% of the population is Pell eligible. So we do need some supports from systems outside of ourselves, but in our particular case, we pay the person's hourly wage while they're taking the class. So they do that at work, and they're getting paid the same hourly wage they got paid if they were out on the shop floor making parts for me. So that's how we participate in that, but I do think it has to be a partnership between the businesses, the schools, and the community in order to make that happen.
Now, Tracy, if you're paying them the hourly wage and they're getting some sort of a skill, maybe a credential, does that make them more employable by other companies? How do you avoid training employees for your competitors?
I think it absolutely makes people more employable, but I will tell you that as an employer, that's what I want for my people. My employees, I have a tendency to look at that, and not everyone's going to agree with me. They are not indentured servants. They are people that may want to move to a different location. They may need to move to a different location. Thank you. Thanks for not saying I'm an idiot. I really appreciate it. People have all kinds of reasons why they need to move. My business may have difficulty at some point and they need to get a job someplace else. I want them to have a portable credentials so that they can show another employer that they're ready to come to work and that they can get a job if that's what they choose to do. I also find that taking that attitude with people allows them to trust me and know that I have their best interest at heart, and we don't generally see that people jump ship just because they got a certificate or a credential. They stay because they feel loyal, but they could leave if they want to, and I think that's a win-win situation.
Tracy, that's impressive. And I've got to say, unfortunately, the exception, right? That level of investment, that intentionality around it is tremendous. I would say, to your question, Rick, it's a combination of players who are responsible for this, certainly employers, certainly educational institutions, but I think it's time to hold government accountable, right? If you look at the investment in workforce development over the last 10 to 15 years, it has dropped significantly. And I think we can't be lulled under this guise that we have 3.5% unemployment. The truth is that we need to continue to skill our workers because the jobs are changing. The demands are different, and they will continue to change, and there will be a significant number of displaced workers if we're not willing to invest in those individuals now. We have an opportunity. The window is there, but we need to, as a nation, invest more dollars in retraining and workforce development in order to remain competitive as a country.
So you're advocating for more government spending and presumably more taxes at the Chamber of Commerce?
You guys want to answer that?
Andrew, I wonder, as the representative on stage of an organization with a scale that is far and beyond what anyone else on this stage has, and arguably rivals some small countries, some state governments, what are your thoughts on the question of resources and who should be funding?
Yeah. Well, I agree with Tracy's basic framing here, which is it requires all parties. I think if you want some data on this, WEF released a report, I believe it was last January, where they attempted with BCG to figure out what's it going to cost to reskill people through challenging job transitions. And I don't remember the data, so I'm just going to make it up, but it'll be directionally correct. So basically they said, like, private companies working in their best interest in a business as usual can profitably reskill about 30% of people. Private companies, if they change the way they look at things, if they bend the cost curve, if they do like a longer term ROI calculation, then you get up to like 60% of people. To close that gap, though, you still need government intervention. And so I think it requires all of these things. I think more companies should be investing in upskilling, both in their own firms and in the market as a whole, particularly large companies like Google. And we made a $1 billion commitment to this work when we launched Grow with Google in 2017. I think I'd like to see more companies stepping up and doing more of this. I think we do need different types of government funding. I'm not about to comment on tax policy, but I think we need different approaches to government financing for these things. We need to unlock new sources of capital. I'm excited about some of the early things like ISAs that people are talking about, and we need to change the cost curve, because at the end of the day, we can't spend. I love many of these nonprofit models. Not yours is a lot cheaper than some of them out there, but $25,000, $30,000 to reskill somebody is simply not a tenable long-term solution. So I think we have to find out new cost models too.
To be fair, I kind of put the words on tax policy in your mouth, so please don't attribute that to him.
Please don't.
Are there specific models or specific ways to upskill workers that multiple employees can buy into, or employers, excuse me, can buy into, that maybe are teaching a set of skills that can benefit either a whole sector or across sectors that you all would point to a set of practices that have been really effective?
I think the model that I shared about using the interactive television is an easy way to reach a lot of companies, small businesses, medium-sized businesses at an effective cost. But I think back to the question on policy and tax, I wouldn't necessarily say that we need to pay more taxes to do that. But I think in what I see is that some of the systems are still funding very heavily on the bricks and mortar of community and technical colleges, which, from a skill perspective in manufacturing, we rely heavily on that. And schools are incented to have bodies in the school building sitting in a chair, and that's how they get their money from the state level. And I think that we haven't really kept pace in terms of funding with new technologies that are available to deliver training remotely. Even when you think about having to have machines to train people. Employers, I think, would be willing, in some cases, to have machines at their factories and plants to train people. But what we need schools and technical colleges to do is to teach our people theory. I'm great at showing somebody how to use a control on a machine or hold a tool and do all that kind of stuff, but what I can't teach you is the theory of some of that. And so schools are really effective at that, and I think there's partnerships and models that we can use, that we can bring this to a larger scale without simply asking people to pay higher taxes to do that.
I'm interested in how we can do more with the community college system, and in particular, kind of building on Tracy's point. So we've brought the IT support certificate to 100 community colleges, working with Jobs for the Future, and it's a really tough process. It's very manual. Every college takes its own approach to this, and so as we think, but what's funny is I often will sit down with community college leaders and in settings like this, and people say, well, employers don't want to work with us. And on the other hand, I sit down at Google and we're like, community colleges don't want to work with us. So where's that breakdown? There's a market breakdown there. I'm excited about models like I've just learned about PathStream that's trying to help companies translate these things into offerings through traditional education. So I feel like that as a technology person, there's a lot that technology can do to unlock better insights about labor market data, to help translate company priorities into new educational offerings. And to the extent that that's something we all can get around, that feels like an exciting area of growth.
Is there a point, though, at which it just needs to be brute resources? I know I keep coming back to this point, but I mean, you mentioned Google with a $1 billion commitment. I mean, Google made $30.7 billion in profit last year. That's for 100,000 employees. At some point, someone with resources is going to have to step in and say, as you have mentioned, across more than just our own company, say we're just going to put the manpower on the streets, or am I wrong in that assumption?
I mean, of course, it takes resources, and I would note that that billion is philanthropic. So there's also, if you add in the time and resources that are spent on these efforts, whether building products or marketing teams, it's far beyond that. So I think it's a pretty sizable commitment. I don't want to downplay that. I do think it takes money, but I would just go back to the earlier point about that money needs to come from a lot of different places. We need more companies stepping up. I think you've seen some of that. I mean, I look at the Walmart example this morning, and lots of big private companies are really dedicating a lot of resources to this question. I think you need new innovative financing mechanisms. I think we need more small businesses to be stepping up too. So I know it's a cop-out, and I wish I had a better answer, but I think it takes everyone, and hopefully that's why we're all here trying to address that.
And I don't want to minimize $1 billion either. It sure sounds nice.
Doesn't go to me.
We do have a question that I want to make sure that we get to, and that is, it's to Tracy, and it says, with your investment into your employees, do you find that your retention rates are higher?
Yes, I think that we do. Somebody asked me about this before we came in here to this panel, and I was saying that, when we're hiring new people, whether it's to increase staff or to replace someone who may have left the company for some reason or another, once they make it past the first couple of months, they know whether or not the culture is right for them. And I think that once people decide that with the investment that we're putting into them, and I think you can tell by the philosophy of how I think about people, they generally stay. So we're usually not trying to replace people that have already found their place in the company. It's usually that we're adding staff, or you have situations turnover related to people's retirements or moving to a different area or something like that. But we're not losing a lot of people just to our competitors.
I want to take a step back. We actually started out by talking about which slices of the labor market maybe upskilling can help with. I'm also curious whether there are parts within different companies that you see that have been maybe neglected. So we spent about kind of your frontline workers. What about management, or what about your kind of middle skilled positions? Are there areas there that you see being neglected or that you see real opportunity for?
I can maybe comment from Google. I think you've hit on an important point, which is that we see a need for reskilling at all levels. I think often there's a prevailing focus on frontline workers, which is for obvious reasons, and it's important. But also, when we look at something like the machine learning crash course, we've required all of our senior software engineers to go through this course because we know that machine learning is going to be the language of computer engineering going forward. So it happens at all levels. I guess I would say it is often easier actually to put things to create these sort of offerings in digital, which is part of the reason why we've done it. So maybe an area where I think we could be lacking is in really high quality resources and focus in whatever you want to call them, power skills, professional skills, so-called soft skills. I think that's an area we don't have as many resources. We haven't quite figured it out. And if I were running the show, I think I would like to invest a little bit more in that, because sometimes I think we focus more on what we can make tangible, and that's often those digital skills. I'd be curious, Plinio, your thoughts on that, because obviously you combine both of those sides of the coin.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think the what we call soft skills is just as important. And when you talk to an employer, they'll say, if I get that, I can teach everything else. And so we do incorporate that into our program, knowing that people don't know what they don't know. If they've never worked before, or it's been a long time since they've been disconnected from the workforce, those skills are incredibly important and are very different now than they were 15, 20 years ago. And so incorporating that in any effective workforce development, I think, is incredibly important.
I think among the employees that are not frontline workers, some of the opportunities that you have with the technology that I mentioned earlier, many community and technical colleges offer something that has to do with customized training, where they'll develop training specific to an employer and bring it to you. But oftentimes in a smaller business, even customized training is extremely expensive, and you often don't have a ton of people to train, so it's hard to spread that cost out. With the training that I mentioned, we have joined together with other manufacturers in our community, sometimes had the technical college develop a customized training program, and then they delivered it through interactive television, where we split that cost with a number of employers. You didn't feel sort of a competitive thing or worry about trade secrets, because we weren't all sitting in the same place when we were doing that training. And so I think for a small employer, that kind of thing can work really effectively.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of the discussion here has been about career and technical colleges. In my job, I hear from a lot of liberal arts institutions, and they are all right now very concerned about tapping the adult market, whether that's students who never finished their four-year degrees or people who are in the workforce and providing certificates for them. Now, this is a sector of the higher ed market that has always held itself up as the liberal arts. We teach critical thinking. We teach a lot of these soft skills that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So from each of your perspectives, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on whether there are things that those colleges, this group of four-year colleges, whether it's private colleges or public colleges, could do better to prepare students for the workplace, or to help you get employees better trained in those soft skills.
One of the things that I am really interested in, I have two young children who are both in college right now, and one of them is definitely at a liberal arts college. And I think that liberal arts colleges, I think every educational institution plays a role in the way that we need to educate people, so you're not going to hear me say that we don't need those things. But I do think that schools that are encouraging more young people to work while they're in college or do internships. I know that I have looked at colleges with my kids that are the cooperative model, where you're working sometimes, going to school sometimes. There are so many young people that are leaving college who have never actually held a job. And any kind of job you do, I don't care if you worked at McDonald's or you worked at Subway or in the retail environment, you are using valuable skills. And if you find the right employer, they're going to look at whatever experience you got on the job. McDonald's, for example. McDonald's is an amazing process-oriented company. People learn about safety. They learn about how to deal with people. They learn about machines and equipment, and I can tell you I have been successful in taking people that have left jobs at McDonald's and training them to be very successful in manufacturing. And so you have to look at what skills they get from work, and colleges need to do a better job of encouraging people to get real-world work experiences in whatever way they can while they're in college, so they're prepared to get out in the workforce when they're done.
Well, I'm a big believer in liberal arts education, and when I get asked about the future of work, I always say two things. I don't know much, but I have a good, strong sense that critical thinking and human skills plus digital skills are the equation that's going to drive the future. So I think investing in liberal arts education is a solid move, and I get frustrated sometimes when other tech people downplay that. I do think what I'd like to see, and one thing we've piloted at Google, is liberal arts colleges investing in digital fluency, because what we know is even in liberal arts occupations, whether it's if you need to be a historian or a social worker or any number of things that maybe are not traditionally digital, even these fields will be transformed by the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so we've actually piloted a program in a number of liberal arts colleges where we offer a 6-month boot camp to these students who have an interest in artificial intelligence and its applications to their education. And so I think I'd love to see more of that, experimenting on the edges with an introduction to digital fluency, as we call it. That doesn't mean that everyone needs to go into computer science engineering. I want to be crystal clear if I haven't already. But I think that partnership between liberal arts skills and digital skills is a powerful potion for success through the future of work.
So, I think they should be worried. I think that, using my daughter as an example, she left her college and said, "Dad, I want to be a nurse. I don't want to take this arts class." And so and nothing against arts majors if there's any in the audience. But the point there is that colleges need to rethink some of these degree programs to be more in line to what is expected in the workforce. In addition to that, I think that colleges need to get better at sharing with, and I don't know if they've got this muscle, and I think this is an area that we need to think about, what's trending, and be able to inform these graduates or these students of what's happening, where are the jobs going to be. If you do want to be a mathematician, how many mathematician jobs are there going to be out there, so that you know what you're getting into post-graduation. That's not happening now. And I think that's a big piece that needs to be included somehow. It's part of this life skills, right? If you're going to be this is the likelihood of you getting a job in that industry, leaving that college. And I think that will help inform that individual sort of decisions around what they do next. Does that make sense?
It's a really interesting observation. I've noticed a lot that the demand either from students or from colleges for students to go into certain programs is very misaligned with what the labor market is actually demanding, just in field of study. And I do wonder going forward, with the labor market changing so much, and while hopefully companies will be doing some reskilling and upskilling of their workers, I think that shakeout is going to be a really interesting process. I actually have high hopes that places can pivot, but I guess the time will tell. Is that where we're settling on that?
You know, I think that time will tell, but I also think that sometimes there can be misunderstandings about what businesses are looking for. And I think about my own self when I graduated from college, which was a long time ago now, but I went into a leadership development program in a large national bank. And the bank, even at that time, was looking for people with all kinds of different majors, because they knew that they had to have a diverse set of, education and thinking going on in the bank in order for it to be successful. So I was in a leadership development program, and I was a business major, but one of my colleagues in that program was a music major. And the bank could recognize that that was somehow going to be valuable to the, diversity that they wanted in thinking and decision making. So I think that if you're having skills and you're prepared to go to work, no matter what your major is, in this environment with very low unemployment, you can find a job. But if you don't recognize your skills and you don't have any prior work experience, it gets to be a little bit more challenging straight out of college.
Maybe I can just add, I think there's a little bit of a fiction that, if we just equipped students and colleges with better data about program outcomes and labor markets, we would get better outcomes. And of course at Google we love data and we're investing a lot in that. it has its limitations. At the end of the day, people make decisions about their careers because of what they've seen, supportive coaches and mentors, and so I think we also, yes, I agree with you, but the way we get there, I think, has to be a combination of supporting supporting colleges and equipping them with data, but also making sure we're investing in strong leaders, coaches, mentors, and role models for students.
I also think investing, we heard examples from the previous panel about how companies are injecting themselves into the community college, right? The work that Accenture and Aon are doing. I think community colleges or colleges that accept that and are able to work with these businesses, I think will produce better workers as a result. And so I'm encouraged by that and the discussion of employers. It's a business imperative, right? They need to develop talent. They need to figure out a way of doing it. And I think one of the best mechanisms out there is the college system.
Great. We're just about out of time, but I'd like each of you very quickly before we go to close on a high note for us and give one piece of advice to any one of these myriad players that we've seen. Employer, policymaker, colleges, that they could do to improve the opportunity for upskilling in the future.
I get to start. This is such a hard question. I think that one of the things we need to do is to find a way to get more small businesses involved in these conversations. Organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, local Chamber of Commerce, has always tried to make sure that the voice of the small business is heard. But I think policymakers need to hear more from small businesses about our unique challenges, and they need to engage at all levels on this front. It's all hands on deck.
I'll give a piece of advice to my fellow philanthropists, which is to put less money into talking and more money into just doing. There are precious few people who are actually like doing out there, and there are a lot of venues where people are talking about what needs to be done. And gosh, I wish we just had more money going to people like you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. and along those lines, I think we know what works. There are very good examples of effective models out there, effective practices. To Andrew's point, let's invest in what works, and let's put those organizations, those practices, those models on a path to scale pretty significantly. Because I think you're right. I think all hands on deck, but all hands on deck right away.
Please join me in thanking our panelists for a great conversation.